So remember, Alexey Arestovych, okay? Alexey Arestovych was ousted. He resigned he resigned formally, said he's not longer going to be a top advisor to Zelensky, which he was throughout this conflict. And the reason why he resigned was after remarks he made for an incident, about an incident that happened earlier this month, a Dnipro attack, right? It was a missile strike that seemed to veer in the wrong direction. Of course, it was called an attack by the Western mainstream media. Russia was blamed immediately. This is how it's been going on since the start of the conflict, and you all know this, right? Since Russia has started special military operation, everything that's happened in Ukraine, the explosions, right? The strikes, it's all been Russia. Ukraine has had no part in this. But Mr. Arestovych, okay, Mr. Arestovych spoke an inconvenient truth. He said that it was quite possible that Ukraine's military made a big error, made a huge error. That Ukraine's military has done this before, and we shouldn't be surprised when Ukraine's military makes mistakes because it has all these weapons. It doesn't really know how to use them. It's training them. It's using a lot of weapons. I mean, we're talking about thousands of rounds per day, per every couple of weeks, just going through tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of rounds, more than the United States can even supply, or NATO can supply, or are willing to supply. So a lot of mistakes have been made. Poland, right? That missile strike, that S-300 missile that killed 2 people. That was Ukraine. Everyone thought, of course, Russia was accused at first, but it was quite clear that it was Ukraine's military. And Alexey Arestovych said that it's quite possible that the Dnipro residential attack was that too. Now, he resigned shortly thereafter. He apologized, then he resigned. Well, he's taken back that apology. And this is important in the context of Bakhmut. Remember, Bakhmut is happening. It's a meat grinder. And it's quite clear that it's going to fall to Russia. It's being encircled as we speak. And now General Mark Milley, he's in the Chiefs of Staff of the United States, is saying, Ukraine, stop focusing on Bakhmut because, 1, you're not going to win. They don't want to say that. But 2, you need to be rearmed, refortified. It's going to take some time to do that. We don't have all the agreements yet. We can't get everything that you want and need to wage some kind of offensive. So why are you wasting all your men and weapons here? Well, the reason is because Ukraine is not in a good situation. And the fact that the United States and NATO have to so desperately try to arm Ukraine in order to get this done, in order to even think about starting another offensive in a conflict that's about to approach 1 year, and there hasn't been any progress for Ukraine's military since the midway point of 2022, should tell you everything you need to know about what's going on with Ukraine. But here is what Alexey Arestovych said. I'm going to read it because the video is having trouble playing. Okay, I'm going to read this, and I'm going to tell you what he had to say. Okay, I'm going to read it verbatim here. So Alexey Arestovych said, let's look at the deaths of Denis Monastyrsky, the late Minister of Internal Affairs of Ukraine, the leadership of the Ministry of Internal Affairs. Does it occur to you that we're no longer in control of our own narrative? Okay, and then he continues. All right. Many people are asking this question, he said, in Ukraine, and I'm guessing the media as well. So you get rid of Arestovych. You get rid of him. So he's referring to himself here, who is an official. Now things are going down. As a person who knows a bit about it, I can say that our narrative is no longer ours, which is very interesting. So he continues. Okay. So he's saying they're losing control of the narrative. Ukraine government, its regime, the military is losing control of the narrative. And then he says, the fact you attack me is fine, he said, the Ukraine's government. I don't mind. I'm not the only one being attacked in this way. They're taking out key figures because we no longer control the narrative. And the reason they don't control the narrative is because they're not winning. We have to remember that. They're not in good shape. They're having a very difficult time even thinking about winning this war because it's not one that's winnable. And Alexey Arestovych knows this. But of course, most of the Kiev regime is a puppet of the United States. And even if they know it, they're not going to do anything about it. They want the perks of what it means to be a U.S. NATO proxy. They don't care about the people who are dying and the people who are suffering. So let's continue. So Alexey Arestovych says that it's happening right now. We are amongst it all. the Russians, are effectively spinning their narrative. So before laughing at silly Russians and thinking we are invincible only if we don't turn on one another. So he's saying that things aren't very good internally. Now that we are extremely vulnerable and we can be defeated very quickly, unexpectedly so for ourselves. I'm no longer an official, so I can say what I want. If you think we are guaranteed to win this war, since the 14th, and I think he's talking about December 14th here, when it was announced that things are pretty bad, when President of Poland said that not only him, but more people said it's not, more officials. You had this in Ukraine as well. It's not clear whether Ukraine can survive this and that the next months are decisive. Do you think he was speaking based on knowing some kind of information or just because? So Alexey Arestovych is saying, do you think that all of these concerns that have been touted, that have been basically stated by Zaluzny, by Reznikov, by the United States, by NATO, that these are just words, by Poland? These aren't just words. These are facts. These are admissions, confessions that things aren't going well and that they could very well lose this war and lose it fast. He's saying it could happen very fast. And so he concludes, okay, well, that was the conclusion. He was asking, is it just because? You think that this is just because? So that's the conclusion. Alexey Arestovych, right? This is not some pro-Russian. They're trying to paint him as pro-Russian. They're trying, even go on his Wikipedia page, right? Just search Alexey Arestovych on Wikipedia. One of the last paragraphs of the introduction tries to make him out to be a Putin puppet at this point. You're always a Putin puppet if you speak some shred of truth. But even in this, he was saying that Russia is spinning their narrative. He's trying to say that Russia is spreading all this propaganda. All right, whether you believe that or not, the fact of the matter is what's important about what he's saying is that Ukraine could lose this war very quickly because there is internal strife. The government is not stable, and that these warnings that have been called, these warnings that have been heeded by Ukraine's military officials, by NATO officials, are not bluffs. They're not, oh, this is just, this is just to get weapons. No, it means that something very bad is happening on the battlefield for Ukraine and that things are turning around in a way that is turning the tide for Russia. And now Bakhmut is important here because what Arestovych says, I'm going to pull up the story here, is very important in the context of what the U.S. is saying. And here is the story. The U.S. is urging Ukraine, yesterday this came out, to not to fixate on defending a key city because it wants to spare its scarce resources until the next round of U.S. arms arrive. So essentially what they're saying here is you're not prepared to fight this right now. And it's unclear, right? Because whenever we hear weapons transfers, weapons this, weapons that, you have to understand that it doesn't just mean you just get weapons. You're not just going to go use them. You have to learn how to use them. You have to train with them. You have to test them. You have to get them off the ground. You have to prepare because this isn't a proxy. This isn't the proxy war like Syria was a proxy war. You're not just going to hand these weapons to some kind of armed bandits and allow, that's what happened in Syria. And of course, it didn't really work there either. Caused some damage. Yes. It prolonged a proxy war. Yes. But the Syrian government was able to defeat these forces in large part because, armed groups, if you have a strong state apparatus, if you have a military united behind you, armed groups are not going to defeat you. But the point with Syria was to create a regime change situation that would cause the fall of Bashar al-Assad internally to make it look like an internal conflict. Ukraine is different because this is now being framed, it has been since the beginning, as a war between Russia and Ukraine and as a war between NATO and Russia, right? Russia is saying it's NATO and Russia. Of course, the United States is saying Russia, unprovoked aggressor, invading Ukraine. But this is a different kind of war. It's a proxy war still because NATO is using Ukraine as a proxy. That's indeed true. But the battleground is different. They're not just sending these arms to armed groups and saying, go have at it, right? It's not the CIA. It's not, it is the CIA is in here training and doing some of this arms distribution, mind you, in Ukraine. But it is a battle that's being waged between state-sanctioned militaries. So even though Ukraine is a coup regime, of course, it's a puppet, it's a proxy, This war is being fought on the front lines. It's much different. And so when you say things like don't fixate on Bakhmut, even though you've been grinding down, losing hundreds of people possibly per day, and because we need to resupply you, and we don't have a timetable for that, because guess what? Ramstein isn't going that well. Ramstein has went okay. You'll get some, but it's not there yet. And so Washington is saying, hold off. It says the U.S. believes that Ukraine should refocus on preparations for a new offensive, suggesting fierce battles in the eastern city of Bakhmut may be hampering Kiev, according to multiple news outlets, citing a senior U.S. official. The comments cut against months of Western media reports that the town as a key strategic area. Speaking to a small group of reporters on Friday, a top official in the administration of President Joe Biden, who refused to be named or cited verbatim, said that Ukraine should not fixate on defending the city of Bakhmut at all costs, according to the American Free Press. Instead, Kiev was advised to use the time to prepare for a large counteroffensive against Russia. The strong focus on the city is hampering Ukraine to the more important task of organizing a spring offensive to reclaim territory lost to Moscow, the official reportedly added, noting that time favors Russia due to its superior artillery and troop numbers. So get that, everyone. That is the big reveal. The big reveal is that there are senior officials in Biden's military apparatus, in his military regime, saying that the United States, saying that Ukraine is not in a good position to win. It's not a good position to wage a counteroffensive. So they are acknowledging a Russian offensive is underway. They are acknowledging that they will have to wait until the spring. So they will have to wait a whole season to try to take back territory lost. That gives Russia how many months? 1, 2, possibly 3. The spring is a large season. And of course, it's colder out east. So that gives Russia possibly 2 months to 3 months to get ready to take more territory. And the United States is saying, well, you've got to do that because you're not prepared yet, and you won't be until the spring. That's how bad things are right now. And so in a similar report released on Friday, Reuters also indirectly quoted a senior Biden administration official advising Kiev to wait until the latest supply of U.S. weaponry is in place and training has been provided, apparently referring to the $2.5 billion arms package approved in Washington this week. The aid includes a large number of military artillery rounds, munitions for U.S.-supplied HIMARS vehicles, but no tanks. A small number of Ukrainian troops are also undergoing training at a U.S. base in Germany, with some learning how to operate the Patriot missile defense battery authorized for Kiev in December. The official allegedly said that Western weapons that will be needed for a mobile offensive force for future battles are currently pouring into Ukraine, adding that Kiev should not waste its limited resources on strategically unimportant targets, according to Reuters. While much of the Western press, including PBS, NBC, CBS, and the New York Times and others, have repeatedly deemed the city a key hub of major strategic importance, U.S. officials have voiced altogether a different view in recent days. So the reason why is because they're losing, okay? They're losing. Ukraine is losing Bakhmut, so it's no longer important. They have to stop. But the Western media, when it seemed like Ukraine was actually able to hold its own for a bit, at least in the beginning, or maybe that was always fantasy, it was very important. It was strategic. The truth of the matter is that it was important. It is an important city. It is important to the defense line for Ukraine. It is important to the supply lines. It's important. But now they have to. The United States has to tell its puppet. It has to tell Ukraine, hold on. Hold on. We have weapons for you. You need to prepare what's more realistic right now, which is months down the road, waging a counteroffensive. So, in effect, you kind of have to bow down here. Tap out. It's going to collapse anyway. Does that sound like a winning strategy to you? So even if Moscow successfully captures the city, the National Security Council spokesperson Kirby said, it's not going to strategically change the dynamics on the battlefield. It's not going to set Ukrainians back to a degree where they're all of a sudden on the back foot and they're losing. So Kirby is trying to say, no, we're not actually losing. Don't worry, guys. The city of Artemovsk, which is Bakhmut, has become a stronghold of the Ukrainian army in the years since the 2014 coup in Kiev. It's part of a 70-kilometer-long defense line created by Ukrainian forces during the intervening years. Russia claims sovereignty over the city, along with the rest of Donetsk People's Republic, which joined Russia in October after referendum. And of course, Kiev rejected it as a sham. So it remains a major logistic hub for Ukrainian forces in the region. It has emerged as a focal point of the conflict in recent months. Russian troops have achieved several victories in the area over the last several weeks, taking the city of Soledar and the strategic village of Klaschievka, among several other settlements, as they seek to encircle Bakhmut. While it remains unclear whether Kiev will heed the advice, the comments from U.S. officials came on the heels of the Friday report in Der Spiegel, which cited Germany's Federal Intelligence Agency as being alarmed over heavy losses suffered by Ukrainian troops in the area. And the British paper The Times also reported that Kiev had sent poorly equipped troops with little combat experience to defend Bakhmut. So in effect, it sent literally soldiers to the meat grinder to die. Does that sound like a great democracy? A democratic government fighting against autocracy of Russia, sending people to die in a meat grinder without proper weapons or training? I mean, when you're out of weapons, what are you doing? You're going to the front line to die. And this is what Scott Ritter predicted on our program here the last time he was on. And he was making kind of a plea to the Ukrainian people, if they're listening to him at all, to the Ukrainian soldiers, don't do it. Don't do it. Don't grind yourself in Bakhmut. Now, the United States is saying this because they know that Bakhmut will fall to Russia, and that if you waste these resources, well, how can you organize a counteroffensive? But the problem for Ukraine here is that now Ukraine has to attempt to wage a counteroffensive without the weapons, either now, without what they need now, or they need to wait months, possibly, to wage an offensive. Now, do either of those things sound realistic? No, they don't. Because as we've covered here, Zaporozhye is under a Russian offensive right now. Soledar has just fallen. Bakhmut's about to fall. Do you think Russia is just going to sit on its heels after mobilizing hundreds of thousands? No, it's going to keep methodically moving forward and taking down more of Ukraine's line and taking down more of its strategic hubs, its logistics hubs, its supply networks, and all of the such, as it's been doing with airstrikes and missile strikes, as it's been doing throughout this conflict. It's going to keep going. And the United States is saying to Ukraine, hold on, don't move anymore in Bakhmut because you don't have the weapons, you don't have the men, you're just going to get grinded down, and you're going to be in a worse position than you already are. That is the situation. It is not what the Western mainstream media is telling you. The Western mainstream media is lying to you. Alexey Arestovych is trying to tell Ukrainians that this is bad, that back in December when those warnings were sent out, they weren't just to get more weapons. Hey, give us more weapons. It was a warning to the puppet masters that the Ukraine's military is in trouble. And this isn't even to mention, as I covered here just prior to that report, Alexey Arestovych was ousted. The interior minister possibly killed or accidentally murdered, or just, a part of what was just a ridiculous situation in the air as a major official during a war zone, right? Regardless of what's happening, there's political instability in Ukraine, and you also have battlefield disadvantages that have only grown worse over time. And now the United States, NATO, they're all saying, hold on, we got to change the narrative here. We have to spin the narrative differently because we are not doing so well. So what are they doing? They're saying Bakhmut isn't important. Ukraine, stop throwing all your, it's somewhat good advice. Stop sending your people there to die. You're only wasting our resources. So let's refocus. But the problem here is that they are showing their hand. They're showing that they have to wait until the spring because they have to prepare. That's still at least a month and a half away, at least, right? So you think about a month and a half, a lot is going to happen on the battlefield, just as we've been covering here. A lot has already happened, and more is going to happen, and it's not going to be good for the collective West, for NATO. It's just not going to be good for them. So Alexey Arestovych just, kind of prophetically reflected what the United States is telling Ukraine. You are in a position of defeat. Stop. Now we're turning on each other. This is what war can do, right? If you have a military that's getting pounded and you don't have the weapons, morale is low, eventually there's going to be internal fighting, infighting. And that is probably going to intensify because as much as the United States wants to think, and I've covered here, right, the foreign policy article saying, prepare for Taiwan, prepare for the next war. And what did Petraeus say? What did Anders Fogh Rasmussen, right, the former NATO Secretary General say? What did all of these forces say? They said weapons are what counts. Weapons are decisive. Well, this is the problem with the imperial mindset. The imperial mindset says weapons are what matters. We're big, we're strong, we will defeat you. And indeed, Russia is not bigger. It's not stronger necessarily than the United States' military. It's arguable. Russia has made many advances, but it's not necessarily stronger. And they're not fighting a war to show how strong their military is. They're not. They're not. They've just mobilized 300,000 troops, and they haven't even deployed all of them, if not a significant portion of them. So Russia is not in the mindset of we're an imperial power. We're going to run through here. We're going to step on the necks of people and we're going to dominate. But the imperial mindset says of the United States and NATO, the weapons, we pour weapons into you, you will be able to just roll through and you will be able to do what you want. Well, what happens when you run out of weapons? What happens when morale is low? What happens when there's political issues internally, like what's happening in Ukraine? What happens when Alexey Arestovych says those warnings that we had in December, they show that we're losing and that only bad can come of what's transpired ever since then, like my ouster. So Alexey Arestovych is saying that top U.S. defense officials are saying, Ukraine, well, stop focusing on Bakhmut. You've been grinding people to death. You have been wasting our resources there. Stop. But the imperial mindset at the same time is thinking, oh, yeah, we've got the spring. We can do this in the spring. Don't worry, when the flowers are blooming out west, right? It's still kind of cold out east, but you all will be just fine once we get you these weapons. How many times have we seen a big military power like the United States defeated regardless of its military power? Afghanistan, Iraq, right? Ejected from those countries, ejected from Korea, ejected from Vietnam. Now, this is different because the U.S. is fighting a proxy war, but indeed, the same conditions prevail where it is only going to get worse, the situation. Russia has the morale. Russia, if you're fighting a great patriotic war, which is what this is becoming, they are hearkening. Russia is saying, we remember World War II. We remember what it was like to be invaded. We remember what it was like to prepare for what NATO is doing now. We remember that. And we're going to fight a great patriotic war, which could be seen as a national liberation war, given the character, the social character of the Donbass. And Ukraine, NATO's proxies, what can they do about that? This was always going to be the outcome. People panicked. Everyone's saying Russia's going to lose. Everyone, the Western mainstream media blacked out information and said, Russia's going to lose. We're going to win. We're going to pump in weapons. We're the imperial albatross. We're the hegemon. We can defeat Russia. They were wrong from the very beginning. The United States, the empire, the collective West, NATO has learned time and time and again that while it might be able to secure some of its interests through its militarism, it can't secure all of them. And now it's coming to the point where it's meeting its match and it can't secure any of them. Will Ukraine join NATO? Maybe at some point in the future. But will that be Russia's red line? Absolutely. And will that bode well for Ukraine? No, it won't. And we're already seeing that in what could be seen. It's been almost a year, but honestly, this is the early stages because this is the grind down battlefield. There's going to be political elements to this. There's going to be economic elements as we're already experiencing. Ukraine's already experiencing. Europe's already experiencing. There's going to be an economic intensification of the consequences of this war. And then, of course, there's going to be the people. You can't never forget the people. You can't forget that Ukraine is full of people. Eventually, the people will get sick of this. There's no doubt about it. There's only so much that fear, repression, propaganda can do. Eventually, people will undermine this war in some way. They will. And so that day is coming for the collective West. It really is. And we're going to see it. We're going to see it. It's going to happen in our lifetime in Ukraine. That's for sure. But we're in for a long one because Russia's offensive, as I said, is not about just rolling through. Now, I can't predict that Russia won't change its strategy based on different conditions and altered conditions. That could happen. We have to look at this through a very critical lens. We have to be ready to change our outlook. But right now, given what Arestovych is saying, right, the ousted aide from Zelensky, given what U.S. officials, military officials are saying, things aren't looking too good. And the United States is trying to say, halt, you need more weapons, stop. You need to prepare for something way down the line because you are now in a position of not offense, but defense and possibly complete annihilation. And Ukraine has been sounding that alarm for a while, and the collective West has tried to ignore it. They can no longer ignore it.